In the sprawling, forgotten corners of the city, where hope is a currency scarcer than cash, lived a man named Arthur Finch. To the world, he was invisible, just another shadow navigating the grimy arteries of a metropolis that had long since cast him aside. He worked odd jobs, his hands calloused, his back aching, a life lived on the razor's edge of survival. But behind his tired, unassuming eyes, a mind of extraordinary brilliance lay dormant, a labyrinth of logic and patterns that no one had ever bothered to explore. His world was a chessboard, and he saw every possible move, every potential outcome, long before the pieces were even touched. He just never had any pieces of his own to play. One rain-slicked evening, that changed. Arthur was cleaning out the back of a derelict warehouse, a job that paid just enough for a week's worth of cheap meals. He stumbled upon a forgotten safe, rusted and ancient. Most would have seen an immovable block of steel. Arthur saw a puzzle. He didn't have tools, only his hands and the debris around him. He listened to the faint clicks of the tumblers, felt the subtle vibrations through the cold metal. It wasn't brute force, it was a conversation with the machine. Hours passed, the city slept, and then, with a final, satisfying thud, the heavy door swung open. Inside wasn't a fortune, but a modest bundle of cash, left behind and forgotten. Holding it, a strange calm washed over him. It wasn't the thrill of theft. It was the quiet satisfaction of solving an impossible problem. That night, something inside Arthur shifted. He hadn't sought out crime, but it had found him, and in its embrace, he discovered a purpose. The quiet genius, so long suppressed, began to stir. He started small, observing the rhythms of the city's underbelly. He wasn't a thug, he was a strategist. He studied security systems not to break them, but to understand their language. He watched armored cars, not for their contents, but for their predictable, human-driven routes. He saw the city not as a place to live, but as a complex system with exploitable flaws. His first real plan was a work of art, executed with the precision of a surgeon. No violence, no noise, just a simple rerouting of data, a digital sleight of hand that made a significant sum of money simply disappear from one account and reappear in another, untraceable. He was a ghost in the machine. For 5 years, Arthur was a phantom, a whisper in the law enforcement community. They called him the architect because the heists were so flawlessly constructed, they seemed more like theoretical exercises than actual crimes. He never got greedy. Each operation was meticulously planned for months, sometimes years. He lived modestly, his life unchanged on the surface. The money was a means to an end, a resource for his true passion, the game itself. He would sit in his small, bare apartment, surrounded by blueprints, timetables, and network diagrams, a modern-day Moriarty, with no desire for a throne, only for the intellectual thrill of the chase. He studied his own patterns, his own psychology, creating false trails and planting misleading evidence for crimes he would never commit, just to keep his pursuers occupied and far from his true methods. He was always 3 steps ahead, a sober and calculated mastermind playing a silent symphony of deception. His magnum opus was to be his last. The target, the Central Diamond Exchange, a fortress of technology and armed guards. It was deemed impenetrable, a challenge that called to Arthur like a siren's song. The plan was audacious, relying not on force, but on a deep understanding of human psychology and bureaucratic loopholes. He orchestrated a series of seemingly unrelated minor events across the city: a fire alarm in a distant substation, a traffic data glitch, a scheduled software update for the exchange's security firm. Each was a single, innocuous note. But when played together, they created a moment of perfect, engineered chaos, a blind spot just wide enough for him to slip through. He walked out not with a bag of diamonds, but with a single, priceless blue gem, the heart of the collection. It was the ultimate checkmate. He had won. He was preparing to vanish forever, to finally give Arthur Finch the quiet life he'd never had. The gem was secured, his tracks were covered, and a new identity awaited him across the ocean. He allowed himself a single moment of sentimentality, a final look at the city that had been his chessboard. He stopped at a small all-night diner for a cup of coffee, the same diner he'd frequented for years. It was a ritual, a small comfort from his old life. As he sat stirring his coffee, a sense of peace settled over him. But he had forgotten the first rule of his own game: never repeat a pattern. The waitress, a woman named Clara who had served him countless times, smiled. She had been interviewed by detectives days earlier, asked if she recognized a blurry face from a distant security camera near one of the architect's earlier, smaller heists. At the time, she hadn't. But tonight, seeing him there, under the familiar fluorescent lights, a flicker of recognition sparked in her memory. It was nothing concrete, just a feeling she casually mentioned to an off-duty officer who happened to be grabbing a late-night meal at the counter. A small, insignificant detail, a loose thread in a perfect tapestry. It was all they needed. Arthur looked up from his coffee to see the reflection of flashing blue and red lights painting the diner's window. No sirens, no drama. Just a quiet, inevitable end. The ghost had finally been seen. The brilliant mind that had outwitted the most advanced security systems in the world was undone by a simple cup of coffee and a familiar face. The game was over. If you or someone you know is facing challenges, remember that talking to someone can make a world of difference. There are resources and people who want to help. Reaching out is a sign of strength. Thank you for watching.